Hello my beautiful friends, my name is Kelsey Taylor and thank you so much for watching today's video. This video is all the books I read in 2022. So I read 30 books this year. So I have a list here of the books that I read, and the first one is Mexican Gothic. I recommend this book to anybody who just likes anything in the horror genre. It talks about a lot of mushrooms in this book. It talked a lot about like mold growing on the wall, but it was a very interesting book but very scary. The next one is Dracul. It was okay, but it wasn't like the best for me, but I'm glad I read it. So the next book that I read, which was a book that I DNF'd, is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. It kept going to winter, spring, autumn, I don't know, just different seasons, and like halfway through the book I DNF'd it because I just couldn't read it anymore because it was just boring. Next book that I read, Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. It wasn't my absolute favorite, and it was just so popular in May. It was everywhere in May, so of course I had to pick it up. Next book I read is King of Battle and Blood, and I actually do have this copy right here. I absolutely devoured this book. This was like a vampire romance. You can see I tabbed it like crazy. I love how the book feels. Like, it's like that velvet feel. I highly recommend this book if you like vampires mixed with romance. The next book that I read is Scarred by Emily McIntyre. I also read her other book, Hook, which I didn't read it. I listened to it on audiobook. There's an enemies to lovers trope in the book. I just really enjoyed this book. I had a good time reading it. Alright guys, the next book, I started reading the Folk of the Air series. I don't have any copies with me. However, I didn't finish the two other books. Definitely recommend the Folk of the Air trilogy, and you want that enemies to lovers trope. Next book listened to on audiobook was City of Thorns. I didn't really enjoy this book cover to cover, but I didn't enjoy it, so that's all I'm gonna say about that. The next book that I read was The Odyssey. A little too complex to read and a little bit difficult, and I don't really enjoy when something is so hard to understand, so the children's edition really helped. Frankenstein. The next book that I read for 2022 is Frankenstein, and this is actually going to be the #1 5-star read. I highly recommend this book to everybody. This is my favorite book of the year that I read. By Mary Shelley, of course. A phenomenal story. I tabbed it like crazy. I read it over the summer of 22. Annotations, like so intense. This, highly recommend, favorite book of 2022. The next book I read was Word Slut. I don't know who the author is, I forgot, but I'll put it up there so you can see. It's interesting to see how words in our society and cultures really define who we are and how we see ourselves. The next book I read is Sapiens by whatever his last name is. It's an interesting take on humanity, on the world. A lot of things I disagree with, as we didn't come like millions of years ago. I believe the world was created in 6 days like the Bible tells us. The next book that I read that is a wonderful fantasy is Kettle and Bone. I really enjoyed this book. I read the whole thing, and it's a really interesting twist take on like fairy tales, so if you like that fairy tale book, highly recommend this one. It was pretty good. I really did enjoy it. The next book that I read for 2022 is Second Place by Kiosk. Second Place by Rachel Cusk. I thought this was a very interesting read. I really enjoyed it. I don't know if I'll continue any more of Cusk's books just because they're not my particular favorite. I forgot that I have a copy on my shelf, so here it is. I'll show proof that I read it. The next book is Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. Wow, this book was so different from anything else that I've read. The next book that I read for 2022 that unfortunately I couldn't bring with me, so I gave it to a bookstore. It is Send Nudes. I really did enjoy it because it takes place in London, and I was reading this in Washington. Oh my gosh, a very unsettling, interesting, unique, kind of gross books I read this year was Paradise Rot. Very interesting read. I read this during the summer and oh my gosh, it was something different that I've ever read before. And the next book that I read for this year is Carmilla by Sheridan LaFowl, I think is how you say your name. Amazing book, iconic, can't say more about it. Please read it if you haven't. Annotated it like crazy. The next book that I read was So Sad Today. It was alright. It was a contemporary read. Didn't really enjoy it, but I read the whole thing and I left it with my sister, so that tells you that I didn't really like it. The next book that I read is Sun Swallowing. This is such a fantastic, life-changing poetry book. This book started helping me to write poetry myself, and that poetry can actually be something so relatable and something so mystical and lyrical and whimsical and graceful and elegant and poised. I didn't get it signed by the author herself, but we both went to see Savannah Brown, which was pretty cool. And so Dakotawarren was in the building, but unfortunately I didn't see her. I saw Savannah Brown, the other poet. I asked her, has she seen Dakotawarren? And she was like, oh, I don't know where she is. I really don't know where she is. So I was like, okay, well, can you sign my poetry book for me? And she was like, sure. So Savannah Brown wrote her signature right there. I said, pick your favorite page from the book. And so she picked this one. We're just girls, after all. I love that. It's so cool. And another amazing thing, so this is kind of turning into like, I don't know, my author signing book, because I also had the legendary Wallace Shawn sign on the back of here because I was gonna buy his book. My camera shut off. But as I was saying, when I met Wallace Shawn at the London review shop, I had him sign this because I didn't buy his book. I had no interest in it, honestly, so he just signed whatever book I had in my tote bag, so I had this one, and there it is, Kelsey Wallace Shawn. Isn't that cool? The book I read is A Horse at Night, Writers on Writing. This was a very interesting read. I really loved it. Highly recommend this book to anybody who wants to learn more about writers and writing and just things like that in general. There was a few deep thoughts in that book that I really reflected on, so I highly recommend this book. Next book that I read was Galatea? Yeah, Galatea. It was not my favorite Greek mythology book ever. It wasn't as good as I'm reading the Song of Achilles. It was alright. I mean, the book was okay. I got rid of my copy. I sold it. So the next book that I read is the Heartstopper yearbook that came out this year by Alice Oseman. It was a really good book. I had a lot of pictures and illustrations in it that were really nice and fun to read. It was just a good, fun book. It made me feel like I was a teenager again. The next book that I read by Alice Oseman is This Winter. That was a very cute Christmassy book that I read and I really enjoyed it. I highly recommend that book to anybody who just wants a good fluffy feel book about family during Christmas and a bit of the dramas that happened there during the holiday season. If We Were Villains by ML Rio. I devoured this book. I loved it. I haven't read The Secret History yet, so it's funny how I picked up this book first. Obviously because it was a lot easier to read and annotate, as you can see here, so it was pretty good. I liked the take on William Shakespeare and how, this is a bit of a spoiler, but how everybody was like, a lot of people were like dying in the end, kind of like a Shakespeare play. And I really liked how they spoke Shakespeare to each other, like spouting out quotes. I thought that was really interesting idea. So she did a good job on this book. So I loved it. And I also love how the book feels. It's like a beautiful velvet. The next book I read is a graphic novel, Fangs by Sarah Anderson. I really enjoyed this. I picked it up at the Notting Hill bookshop back in May when I visited. And it was such a wonderful love story between a vampire and a werewolf. Really cozy, giddy vibes. So if you enjoy just like a happy read, and something that's just a joy to read and something that you get through like very fast. I flew through this book and I've actually read it twice, funny enough. But it was just really cute and I like how the drawings are, and it's like a contemporary, so it has some modern aspects to it. but I did like the whole concept. It was pretty cute. I like how here they're reading Dracula and then Interview with the Vampire. I think that's really funny. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book and highly recommend. The next book I read is a poetry book, Watering the Soul. I really enjoyed this. I forgot the author's name because it's an American book, so I bought it at Target and then I gave it to my sister, but it was a really good poetry book for people struggling with like mental health and people who just want to be seen. The next book that I read this year is Mysteries of Thorn Manor by Margaret Rogerson. I still have the receipts in here, haha. But I read this book and absolutely loved it. I wasn't sure at first, so I was reading it and I was like, am I gonna like this book? Because I never read anything by this author. I know she wrote some very popular other books like The Sorcery of Thorns, Enchanted Ravens, which I did buy like 3 years ago, but I've never read it. And I actually gave the book away, so now I don't even own it, but maybe I'll buy it again. Because I was so enchanted by this book. It's such a wonderful romance. And it's a bit like enemies to lovers, I could say. Really enjoyed it. And look at that illustration, isn't it? Alright guys, the next book that I read for 2022 is Bluets by Maggie Nielsen. This was such a cool book. It's written by this poet. It's a non-fiction and it's just so amazing. It's all about the color. It's about the color blue and how colors in life in general really make up our world, and it was so deep just on the specific color of blue. Of course I have matching, you can see matching tabs with the books. It's pretty much all the books that I read for 2022. I did, however, halfway through Legends and Lattes. I meant to read this for 2022, but I didn't finish it in time and I read it like probably like 6 days after New Year, so I don't really consider this a 2022 read since I didn't finish it in that year. But I was halfway through it, but I just wanted to put it in here just to show you guys. I did finish it, however. Super cute fantasy about orcs, these little gnomes, about like these little monsters. Like if you just want something to sit down and read about Cinnabons and the smell of coffee. I love this one funny saying that they say in the book because these orcs don't know what coffee is and they call it bean water. I thought that was so cute. His name is Thimble and I just love this character. I loved the character better than the main character, Vive. But I think this illustration is super cute and cozy, but I did love Thimble. He was like my favorite character in the book. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. That is my 30 books of 2022. I love you guys so much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Second place by Kiosk. Deep. It had some provoking it had some pretty deep, thought-provoking